Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Before the ideas begin, a small request: most of you who watch are not subscribed, and we've noticed this in the numbers, in the gap between views and the audience that stays. We post every single day, we put care into each script, each thought, each question that unfolds in the dark, and if these videos have become part of your nights, if they help you think or drift, or simply exist in that space between waking and sleep, consider subscribing, hitting the like button, turning on notifications so you know when the next one arrives. And if you feel moved to do so, leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from. What philosophical question occupies your mind the most? What idea you return to when everything else falls away? These small gestures matter more than you might think. They allow this work to continue. They allow these ideas to reach others like you, scattered across the world, awake in the quiet hours. Now the introduction ends and the philosophy begins. Every culture sees itself as the centre, as the normal, as the standard against which all others are measured. And this seeing is not perception, but is construction, is not discovery, but is projection, is the way that collective consciousness creates a mirror that reflects not what is there, but what needs to be there. What the culture needs to believe about itself in order to maintain coherence, to justify its existence, to explain why it is the way it is and why that way is right, is natural, is superior to the ways of others. And the superiority is not argued, but is assumed, is the unexamined premise that underlies all cultural self-understanding, is the narcissism that is not individual, but is collective, is the belief that we are special, are chosen, are exceptional, and the exceptional is what every culture believes about itself, is the myth that every nation tells, is the story that makes the culture cohere, that gives members a sense of belonging, of pride, of being part of something that matters. And the mattering is created through the mirror, through the reflection that shows not reality, but idealization. Not what is, but what is imagined. Not the truth, but the narrative. And the narrative is selective, is editing out what does not fit, is highlighting what confirms, is creating the image that the culture wants to see, needs to see, must see in order to function. And the functioning requires this distortion, requires this narcissism, because without it the culture would have to confront its ordinariness, its contingency, its lack of cosmic significance. And the lack is unbearable, is threatening to the collective sense of worth, is undermining the pride that holds the group together. And so the mirror is maintained, is polished, is defended against any reflection that might show something different, something less flattering, something true. And the truth is what the mirror hides, is what the distortion prevents, is what the narcissism protects against. Because the truth is that every culture is just one culture among many, is not special, is not chosen, is not superior, is just a particular arrangement of customs and beliefs and practices that happen to emerge in a particular place at a particular time. And that could have been otherwise. And the otherwise is what cannot be acknowledged, is what the mirror does not show, is what the myth denies, because acknowledging contingency is admitting that the culture is not necessary, is not inevitable, is not the fulfillment of destiny, but is just accident, just history, just the result of forces that have nothing to do with the culture's self-understanding. And the self-understanding is what the mirror creates, is what the myth provides, is the story that makes the culture make sense, that explains why things are the way they are, that justifies the structures, the hierarchies, the inequalities that characterize every culture. And the justification is necessary, is required, is what prevents revolution, what maintains order, what ensures that those who benefit from the arrangement continue to benefit, and those who suffer continue to accept their suffering as natural, as deserved, as the way things must be. And the must is the mythology, is the claim to necessity, is the insistence that this culture, this arrangement, this way of being is not just one way, but is the way, is the correct way, is the superior way. And the superiority is demonstrated through comparison, through the creation of the other, through the projection onto outsiders of everything that the culture rejects in itself, everything that threatens the idealized image, everything that the mirror cannot reflect without shattering. And the shattering is what must be prevented, is what the other makes possible by absorbing all the negativity, all the qualities that the culture denies having, all the characteristics that are incompatible with the myth. And the incompatible is projected outward, is placed onto foreigners, onto enemies, onto those who are different. And the difference is constructed, is exaggerated, is made to seem absolute when it is relative, is made to seem essential when it is superficial, is made to seem threatening when it is merely unfamiliar. And the unfamiliar is what the culture cannot tolerate, cannot integrate, cannot acknowledge without threatening the narrative, without disturbing the reflection, without revealing that the mirror is distorting, is lying, is showing not reality, but fantasy. And the fantasy is collective, is shared, is believed, not because evidence supports it, but because the culture requires it, requires the belief that we are good, are just, are noble, are superior, and the superior is the story that every empire tells, is the myth that every dominant culture maintains, is the narrative that justifies conquest, exploitation, domination. Because if we are superior, then we have the right to rule, have the obligation to civilize, have the duty to spread our ways to those who are inferior, who are backward, who are lacking what we have. And what we have is not just wealth or technology or power, but is virtue, is morality, is the right way of being human. And the right way is our way, is the only way, is the way that must be imposed on others for their own good. And the good is what we define, is what our mirror shows, is what our mythology proclaims. And the proclaiming is not questioned internally, is not doubted by members, is accepted as truth, as obvious as the way things are. Because the culture has been internalized, has been absorbed, has become the framework through which reality is perceived, and perception is always filtered, is always shaped by the categories that culture provides, by the concepts that language offers, by the narratives that mythology supplies, and the supply is constant, is reinforced through education, through media, through the rituals that celebrate the culture, through the symbols that represent it, through the history that is taught. And the teaching is selective, is presenting only the parts that confirm the narrative, that support the myth, that maintain the reflection, and the reflection shows heroes, shows triumphs, shows progress, shows the culture moving toward perfection, toward the realization of its values, toward the fulfillment of its destiny. And the destiny is what the myth claims, is the belief that the culture is not just existing, but is going somewhere, is fulfilling a purpose, is playing a role in a larger story. And the story is always about us, is always centered on our experience, is always presenting our perspective as the perspective, our values as the values, our way as the way. And the way is not recognized as particular, but is experienced as universal, is not seen as one option among many, but is felt as the natural, the normal, the correct. And the correct is what blindness produces, is what the mirror creates, is the inability to see that the reflection is distorted, that the image is idealized, that the narrative is selective, and the selective is what creates the blind spots, is what prevents the culture from seeing its own violence, its own exploitation, its own contradictions, because these do not fit the narrative, do not confirm the myth, do not appear in the mirror, and so they are not seen, are not acknowledged, are not integrated into the culture's self-understanding, and the understanding remains partial, remains distorted, remains narcissistic. And the narcissism is not pathological in the individual sense, but is structural, is built into the way that cultures function, is necessary for cohesion, for identity, for the maintenance of boundaries. Because without the belief that we are special, the culture would dissolve, would fragment, would lose the binding force that makes a collection of individuals into a collective. and the collective requires mythology, requires shared stories, requires the mirror that reflects not individuals, but the group, not reality, but the ideal, not what is, but what is imagined, and the imagined is powerful, is shaping behavior, is creating expectations, is defining roles, is organizing life, and the organization is not neutral, is not innocent, is serving interests, is maintaining hierarchies, is justifying inequalities. Because the mythology always benefits some more than others, always privileges certain positions, always legitimates certain arrangements. And the legitimation is what the mirror provides, is what the myth accomplishes, is the conversion of contingent social arrangements into natural necessities of historical accidents, into inevitable developments of particular values, into universal truths. And the truths are not true, but are believed, are accepted, are acted upon. And the acting upon is what makes them real, in a sense, is what gives them power, is what makes them consequential. Because collective beliefs shape collective action, shape policy, shape war, shape empire. An empire is always justified through mythology, is always presenting itself as bringing civilization, bringing progress, bringing enlightenment to those who lack it. And the lack is projected, is assumed, is what the mirror does not show about the empire itself, which is that what it brings is often destruction, is exploitation, is the imposition of its ways onto others who did not ask for them, do not want them, are harmed by them, but the harm is not seen, is not reflected in the mirror, is not part of the narrative, because the narrative is about benevolence, about mission, about the burden that the superior must bear, and the burden is the story that Kipling told, is the myth that empires use, is the claim that domination is duty, that conquest is care. That exploitation is education, and the education is the transfer of culture, is the spreading of the superior ways, is the civilizing mission that justifies everything, that makes violence noble, that makes theft righteous, that makes subjugation liberation, and the liberation is what the empire claims to bring, is what its mythology proclaims, is what its mirror reflects, and the reflection is believed not just by rulers, but by the ruled, not just by exploiters, but by the exploited, because the mythology is totalizing, is pervasive, is shaping consciousness, is providing the categories through which experience is understood. And understanding within the mythology confirms the mythology, is circular, is self-reinforcing, is making it difficult to see outside, to recognize the distortion, to notice that the mirror is lying, and the lying is not intentional, is not conspiracy, is structural, is the way that collective narcissism operates, is the inevitable result of cultures needing to see themselves as good, as just, as right. And the right is always defined by the culture itself, is always reflecting back what the culture wants to see, is never showing what the culture is afraid to see, which is its own violence, its own hypocrisy, its own contingency. And the contingency is what every national myth denies, is what every claim to exceptionalism rejects, is the recognition that this culture could have been otherwise, that its values are not universal, but are particular, that its supremacy is not deserved, but is the result of power, of conquest, of accident. And the accident is what cannot be admitted, is what the mythology covers, is what the mirror hides, because admitting accident is admitting that the culture is not special, is not chosen, is not fulfilling destiny, but is just existing, just happening, just being one arrangement among many possible arrangements. And the many is what threatens, is what the other represents, is what must be denied in order to maintain the belief that we are the centre, are the standard, are the measure. And the measure is how cultures see others, is how they project onto difference. Everything they reject in themselves is how they create the barbarian, the savage, the backward, the enemy. And the enemy is necessary, is required by the mythology, is what defines the culture by contrast, is what makes us good by being bad, Is what makes us civilized by being savage? Is what makes us superior by being inferior? And the inferior is not discovered but is created, is constructed through the selection of differences, through the exaggeration of contrasts, through the interpretation of practices as evidence of backwardness. And the backwardness is what justifies intervention, justifies domination, justifies the spreading of our ways, because if they are backward, then they need us, need our help, need our civilization. And the civilization is what we bring, what we impose, what we force upon them for their own good. And the good is what we define, is what our values dictate, is what our mythology proclaims. And the proclaiming is not listening, is not dialogue, is not exchange, is imposition, is violence, is the erasure of their culture in the name of bringing them ours. And the erasure is not seen as violence, but is seen as progress, is seen as liberation, is seen as the inevitable movement toward the universal, which is really the particular disguised as universal, is our particular values presented as the values, our particular ways presented as the way, our particular culture presented as culture itself. And culture itself is what we believe we are, is what the mirror shows, is what the mythology claims, that we are not just a culture, but our culture, are not just civilized, but our civilization, are not just one way of being human, but are the way, the correct way, the superior way, and the superiority is what cannot be questioned internally, is what is taboo to doubt, is what is defended violently when challenged. Because challenging the myth is challenging the culture's identity, is threatening the collective narcissism, is disturbing the mirror, and the mirror must be maintained, must be protected, must be polished, because without it, the culture would have to see itself as it is, would have to confront its ordinariness, its violence, its contradictions. And the contradictions are everywhere, are visible to outsiders, are obvious to those who are not invested in the mythology, but are invisible to insiders, are not reflected in the mirror, are edited out of the narrative, are the blind spots that every culture has, that every mythology creates, that every collective narcissism requires, because seeing the contradictions would require changing, would require admitting error, would require acknowledging that the culture is not what it claims to be, is not as good as it believes, is not as just as it proclaims, and the proclaiming is constant, is part of the mythology, is the endless assertion that we are different, are better, are special, are the exception to the patterns that govern other cultures. And the exception is what every empire believes, is the myth of American exceptionalism, of British civilizing mission, of French universal values, of every dominant culture that has ever existed, each believing that it is different, that it is not like the empires that came before, that its domination is justified where others were not, that its violence is necessary where others was cruel, that its expansion is liberation where others was conquest. And the difference is illusion, is projection, is the mirror showing what the culture needs to see, which is that we are good, are noble, are doing what is right, and the right is whatever we are doing, is whatever serves our interests, is whatever maintains our power, and the power is presented as service, as burden, as duty, and the duty is what the mythology creates, is the belief that we must spread our ways, must bring our civilization, must impose our order, because without us the world would be chaos, would be darkness, would be backward, and the backward is where others are, is what defines them, is what justifies our dominance, and the dominance is not called dominance, but is called leadership, is called guidance, is called help. And the help is not asked for, is not wanted, is imposed, is forced, is the violence that the mirror does not show, that the mythology does not name, that the culture does not see, because seeing it would require shattering the mirror, would require abandoning the myth, would require confronting the collective narcissism. And the confronting is what cannot happen, is what is too threatening, is what would destroy the culture's sense of itself. And the sense of itself is what the culture is the only coherence it has, is the mythology that makes it a culture rather than just a collection of people. And so the mirror is maintained, the myth is preserved, the narcissism continues, and the culture sees itself as it needs to see itself, as special, as superior, as exceptional. And the exceptional is what every culture believes, is the universal delusion, is the distorted reflection that is mistaken for reality, is the mirror stage of culture where the culture is forever trapped, forever seeing the idealized image, forever believing the mythology, forever blind to the contradictions, forever projecting onto others what it cannot acknowledge in itself, forever creating the other who absorbs the negativity, who represents the threat, who justifies the violence, and the violence continues, the mythology persists, the mirror remains, and cultures continue to see themselves as the center, as the standard, as the exception, and the exception is the lie, is the delusion, is the collective narcissism that every culture exhibits, that every mythology maintains, that every mirror reflects, and the reflecting is distorting, is hiding, is preventing the culture from seeing what it is, from acknowledging its contingency, from recognizing its violence, from confronting its contradictions, from shattering the mirror, from abandoning the myth, from giving up the narcissism. And the giving up is impossible, is what cultures cannot do, is what would mean their dissolution, their end, their transformation into something else. And the something else is what is feared, is what the mythology prevents, is what the mirror hides, is what the collective narcissism protects against. And the protection is the function, is what the distorted reflection accomplishes, is what makes cultures culture, is what allows collective identity, is what creates the binding force, and the force is mythology, is narrative, is the mirror that shows not truth, but need, not reality, but fantasy, not what is, but what must be believed. And the belief is collective, is shared, is the myth that we are special, are chosen, are exceptional, and the exceptional is the delusion, is the mirror stage of culture, is the permanent condition of collective consciousness, is the way that societies see themselves as distorted reflections, as idealized images, as mythological narratives, and the narratives are false, are projections, are narcissistic, and the narcissism is structural, is necessary, is what makes culture possible, is what creates cohesion, is what maintains the illusion that we are the center, are the standard, are the measure, and the measure is the mirror, is the myth, is the collective narcissism that every culture exhibits, that every society maintains, that every empire believes, that every nation proclaims. And the proclaiming is the distortion, is the reflection, is the mirror stage where culture is trapped, where it sees itself not as it is, but as it needs to be, not as truth, but as mythology, not as one among many, but as the one, the exceptional, the special, the superior. And the superior is the lie, is the mirror, is the stage where culture performs for itself, where it reflects its own image, where it sees only what it wants to see. And what it wants to see is that it matters, that it is right, that it is good. And the good is the reflection, is the myth, is the collective narcissism, is the mirror stage of culture where every culture is trapped, where every society remains, where every empire believes its own mythology, and the mythology is the mirror, is the distortion, is the way that cultures see themselves, as exceptional, as special, as superior. And the superior is the delusion, is the projection, is the narcissism, is the mirror stage that never ends, that continues forever, that defines culture, that creates the blind spots, that maintains the myth, that polishes the mirror, that reflects the lie. And the lie is believed, is shared, is what makes culture culture. And culture is the mirror, is the stage, is the collective narcissism, is the distorted reflection, is the mythology, is the illusion that we are exceptional, and the exceptional is what every culture believes, is the universal delusion, is the mirror stage of culture that shows not truth but need, not reality but fantasy, not what is but what must be seen, and the seeing is distorted, is narcissistic, is collective, is the way that cultures see themselves, forever, inevitably, necessarily, as the center, as the standard, as the exception. And the exception is the myth, is the mirror, is the stage where culture performs, where it reflects, where it believes its own lies, and the lies are the culture, are the mythology, are the collective narcissism, are the mirror stage that every society inhabits, that every culture maintains, that every empire believes. And the believing is the distortion, is the reflection, is the way that cultures see themselves as exceptional when they are ordinary, as superior when they are equal, as chosen when they are contingent. And the contingent is what the mirror hides, is what the myth denies, is what the collective narcissism protects against. And the protection is permanent, is structural, is what makes the mirror stage of culture eternal, inevitable, universal. The way that all societies see themselves as distorted reflections, as idealized images, as mythological narratives that are believed, that are shared, that are maintained, that are the culture, that are the mirror, that are the stage, that are the collective narcissism that defines human social existence, that creates the blind spots, that justifies the violence, that maintains the myth, that every culture exhibits, that every society believes, that every empire proclaims, and the proclaiming is the mirror, is the stage, is the distorted reflection that is culture seeing itself. Meaning was not invented but was given, was not constructed but was inherited, was not the product of individual reflection but was the air that was breathed, the framework that was absorbed, the structure that made sense of suffering, of labour, of death, of everything that otherwise would be unbearable. And this given meaning came from stories, from gods, from hierarchies that extended beyond the human into the cosmic, into realms where purposes were assigned, where roles were fixed, where every life, no matter how small, had significance, because it was part of a larger pattern, a divine plan, a cosmic order that justified suffering, that explained inequality, that made death not an end, but a transition. And the transition was to something, was leading somewhere, was part of a narrative that continued beyond the visible, beyond the mortal, beyond the contingent facts of this world, into eternal truths that grounded everything. And the grounding is what modernity has lost, is what the Enlightenment destroyed, is what science dissolved by showing that the cosmic order was projection, was fiction, was the human need for meaning imposed onto a universe that has no meaning, that cares nothing for human purposes, that operates according to laws that are indifferent to whether anyone suffers or flourishes. And the indifference is what modern consciousness must confront, must live with, must somehow survive, and the survival is difficult, is producing the crisis that thinkers have been naming for centuries. The meaning crisis, the disenchantment, the death of God that Nietzsche announced not as celebration, but as diagnosis, as the recognition that the framework had collapsed, that the stories no longer worked, that the gods were no longer believable. And the unbelievability was not failure of faith, but was the inevitable result of knowledge, of the scientific worldview that explained through mechanism what had been explained through purpose, that showed causes where there had been reasons, that revealed the universe to be vast and old and empty of anything like human meaning. And the emptiness is what modern consciousness inherits, is the vacuum that religion once filled, is the absence that creates the crisis, because humans need meaning, are built to seek it, are suffering without it, are experiencing the pointlessness as pathology, as depression, as the epidemic of despair that characterizes wealthy secular societies, where material needs are met but existential needs are not. Where comfort is abundant but purpose is absent. Where life is long but feels empty, and the emptiness is not new, but the awareness of it is new, is the result of losing the stories that made the emptiness tolerable, that covered it over, that provided the illusion of significance. An illusion is what the religious frameworks were. But they were functional illusions, were useful fictions, were false but necessary. And the necessity is what modernity has trouble acknowledging, has trouble accepting, because modernity is committed to truth, to science, to the rejection of comfortable lies, but the rejection has costs, is leaving people without the resources to make sense of existence, without the narratives that make suffering meaningful, without the structures that provide purpose. And purpose cannot be manufactured, cannot be created through individual will, cannot be generated by deciding to care about something, because caring requires reasons, and reasons require frameworks, and frameworks are inherited, not invented, are received, not constructed, are given by cultures, by traditions, by the accumulated wisdom of generations who faced the same emptiness and created stories to fill it. And the stories worked not because they were true, but because they were shared, were collective, were providing roles and meanings that were recognized by others, that were part of a social world where purpose was public, was confirmed, was real in the way that social facts are real. And social facts require agreement, require participation, require that people act as if the meaning is there. And the as if is what modernity has trouble with, is what secular consciousness resists, because acting as if seems like pretending, seems like bad faith, seems like the self-deception that Sartre warned against. And so modern individuals are caught between the need for meaning and the inability to believe in the sources of meaning, between the hunger for purpose and the knowledge that purpose is not inherent but is imposed, is constructed, is chosen. And chosen meaning feels arbitrary, feels thin, feels like it could be otherwise, and therefore feels like it is not really meaning at all, but is just preference, just a subjective valuing that has no grounding, no justification, no claim to be anything more than personal taste. And taste is not enough, is not providing the weight that meaning requires, is not making life feel significant, is not answering the question of why any of this matters. And the why is the question that modernity cannot answer, is the question that haunts secular consciousness, is the question that produces the crisis. And the crisis is not just intellectual, but is visceral, is felt, is experienced as the flatness of existence, as the sense that nothing really matters, that everything is permitted because nothing is forbidden, that values are just opinions, and opinions are just brain states, and brain states are just physics. And the physics is indifferent, is not caring, is not providing any reason to do anything, to be anything, to continue existing. And the continuing is what becomes questionable, is what the meaning crisis threatens, is why suicide rates rise, why despair spreads, why affluent societies are seeing increases in deaths of despair, in overdoses, in suicides, in all the ways that people exit when existence feels unbearable. And the unbearable is not material, but is existential, is not about lacking things, but about lacking reasons, lacking purposes, lacking the framework that makes effort meaningful, that makes suffering tolerable, that makes life worth living. And the worth is what is missing, is what cannot be found, is what modernity has destroyed without replacing. And the replacements that have been tried are failing, are not working, are revealing themselves to be inadequate substitutes for what was lost. And what was lost was not just belief in God, but was the entire worldview that made God plausible, that made divine purpose conceivable, that made cosmic meaning possible. And the possible is what has been eliminated, is what science has shown to be projection, to be anthropomorphism, to be the mistaken attribution of human qualities to the universe. And the mistake is understandable, is natural, is the way that consciousness makes sense of the world. But it is still mistake, is still error, is still something that cannot be sustained once knowledge advances, once the mechanisms are understood, once the causes are revealed and the revealing is irreversible, is not allowing return to innocence, is not permitting the restoration of belief, is creating the permanent condition of disenchantment, of knowing that the meanings are not discovered but are created, are not inherent but are imposed, and the imposed cannot carry the weight that the discovered could carry, cannot provide the grounding that the inherent provided, cannot make life feel significant in the way that cosmic purpose made it feel significant. And so modernity is searching, is trying to find secular substitutes, is trying to create meanings that do not depend on the supernatural, on the transcendent, on the stories that are no longer believable. And the substitutes that are tried are varied, are including humanism, the belief that human values are sufficient, that human flourishing is purpose enough, that making life better for people is meaning enough. But humanism is thin, is not providing the depth that religious meaning provided, is not explaining why human flourishing matters, is not grounding value in anything beyond human preference. And preference is not enough, is not answering the question of why this preference rather than another. Why care about flourishing rather than about something else? And the something else is always available, is always an option. And without grounding, the choice feels arbitrary, feels like it could be different. And what can be different feels less real, less binding, less meaningful. And so humanism satisfies some, but not others, works for those who do not need deep grounding, but does not work for those who do, who need reasons that extend beyond the human, beyond the contingent, beyond the arbitrary. And these people are searching, are trying other substitutes, are trying nationalism, the belief that the nation provides purpose, that serving the collective gives life meaning, that sacrifice for the group is the answer. But nationalism is dangerous, is leading to conflict, is producing the us versus them that justifies violence, that makes the other into enemy, that converts the search for meaning into the justification for harm. And the harm is what makes nationalism unsustainable, as meaning is what reveals it to be destructive, to be the kind of substitute that is worse than the absence it is trying to fill. And so nationalism is rejected by many, is seen as the wrong answer, but the rejection leaves the question open, leaves the search continuing. And another substitute that is tried is ideology, the belief that political movements provide purpose, that working for justice or equality or liberation gives life meaning. That commitment to the cause is the answer, and for some this works, is providing the structure that was lost, is giving roles and purposes, and the sense of being part of something larger, something important, something that justifies effort and sacrifice. But ideology is also dangerous, is also producing conflict, is also dividing the world into believers and heretics, is creating the certainty that is intolerant, that is unwilling to coexist with doubt. And the doubt is what ideology cannot tolerate, is what it must suppress. And the suppression is violence, is coercion, is the same problem that religion had, that any totalizing meaning system has, which is that it cannot allow alternatives, cannot permit questioning, cannot coexist with the plurality that modernity also values. And so ideology is failing as substitute, is producing as much harm as good, is not solving the meaning crisis, but is creating new problems, new conflicts, new reasons for despair. And the despair is what remains, is what continues, is what characterizes modern consciousness, when all the substitutes are tried and found wanting, when the search for meaning exhausts itself, when the recognition arrives that maybe meaning cannot be found, cannot be manufactured, cannot be created through individual or collective will, because meaning was never something that humans made, but was something they received, was given by frameworks that emerged over centuries, that were refined through generations, that worked because they were inherited, not because they were chosen. And choosing meaning is the modern problem, is the thing that modernity demands, but that consciousness cannot do, because choice requires reasons, and reasons require grounding, and grounding is what is missing, is what was lost with the death of God, with the collapse of cosmic purpose, with the recognition that the universe is indifferent, and the indifference is the truth, is what science reveals, is what honesty requires accepting, and the acceptance is what some philosophers advocate, is what Camus called absurdism, is the response that acknowledges the meaninglessness while refusing to be destroyed by it, that confronts the absurd without fleeing into suicide or into false hope, that lives with full awareness of the void while continuing to live, while continuing to act, while continuing to find moments of joy and connection and beauty, even though none of it means anything in the cosmic sense. None of it matters beyond the moment. None of it will be remembered once consciousness ends, and the ending is inevitable, is coming for everyone, is the final proof that nothing matters, that all effort is futile, that existence is temporary and meaning is impossible. And yet the absurd response is to continue anyway, is to rebel against the meaninglessness, not by denying it, but by living in spite of it, by affirming life without justification, by finding satisfaction in the act of living itself, rather than in any purpose that living serves. And the serving is what is abandoned, is what the absurd lets go of, is what is recognized as impossible. And the impossible is what modernity must accept, must live with, must somehow survive. And the survival is not guaranteed, is not easy, is requiring a transformation of consciousness, a new way of being human that does not need cosmic meaning, that does not require divine purpose, that can tolerate the void without filling it, that can live with the knowledge that existence is contingent, that meaning is constructed, that everything could be otherwise. And the otherwise is what makes nothing necessary, nothing absolute, nothing secure, and the insecurity is the permanent condition, is what modernity offers, is what the horizon of meaning looks like when the horizon keeps receding, when the destination is revealed to be illusion, when the search is recognized as endless because there is nothing to find, no meaning to discover, no purpose to uncover, only the void, only the emptiness, only the silence of the universe that does not answer, that does not care, that does not provide what humans need. And the need is real, is not going away, is producing the crisis that may not have solution, that may be the permanent condition of secular consciousness, of enlightened awareness, of the knowledge that liberates from illusion, but enslaves to despair. And the despair is what remains, is what continues, is what characterizes the horizon of meaning in modernity, the flat landscape where purposes used to stand, where gods used to reign, where cosmic order used to justify suffering, and now there is nothing, or there is only what can be constructed, what can be chosen, what can be performed, and the performance feels hollow, feels fake, feels like going through motions, without conviction, and conviction is what is missing, is what cannot be manufactured, is what made religious meaning work, and without it the secular substitutes fail. The humanisms and nationalisms and ideologies all fail because they lack the weight, lack the depth, lack the grounding that conviction requires, and the requires is what consciousness needs, is what makes meaning meaning rather than just preference. And preference is not enough, has never been enough, will never be enough, because humans are built for meaning, are requiring it, are suffering without it. And the suffering is the crisis, is the modern condition, is the permanent state of existence at the horizon of meaning, where the horizon is empty, is revealing nothing, is offering nothing except the recognition that meaning was always illusion, was always projection, was always the human need imposed onto a universe that provides nothing, that offers nothing, that is indifferent to whether anyone finds meaning or drowns in meaninglessness. And the drowning is happening, is visible, is the epidemic of despair, is the meaning crisis that modernity cannot solve, because the solution would require believing what cannot be believed, accepting what knowledge has revealed to be false, returning to illusions that have been seen through, And the seeing through is irreversible, is permanent, is leaving consciousness stranded at the horizon of meaning, where the horizon extends forever and reveals nothing, where the search continues because it must, but where nothing is found because nothing is there, because meaning is not discovered but was always created, was always the story that consciousness told itself, and the story has ended, has been revealed as story, and what remains is the silence, the emptiness, the void that religions were covering, that purposes were filling, that cosmic orders were organizing, and the organizing is gone, is lost, is leaving consciousness alone with existence, with the fact of being without the reason for being, with life without purpose, with experience without significance, and the without is the horizon, is what modernity sees when it looks for meaning, and the looking continues, must continue, because consciousness cannot stop seeking what it needs. But the seeking finds nothing, reveals nothing, discovers nothing except the fact that there is nothing to discover, that the horizon is empty, that meaning is absent, that purpose is impossible, and the impossible is what must be lived with, must be endured, must be survived, and the survival is what absurdism attempts, what Camus offered, what some find sufficient, but many do not, many cannot. Many are destroyed by the emptiness, by the meaninglessness, by the recognition that nothing matters and nothing can be done to make it matter. And the cannot is the tragedy, is the modern condition, is the permanent crisis at the horizon of meaning, where meaning has ended, where purpose has collapsed, where existence continues but significance does not. And the does not is what remains, is what persists, is what characterizes life at the horizon, where the horizon is empty, where the search reveals nothing, where consciousness is alone with its need for meaning in a universe that provides none, that offers none, that will never provide any, because meaning is not there, was never there, is only here in consciousness, in the stories that are told, in the illusions that are maintained, and the maintaining is what modernity cannot do, is what knowledge prevents, is what honesty forbids, and so the crisis continues, the despair persists, the horizon remains empty, and consciousness must somehow survive, must somehow continue, must somehow live without meaning, without purpose, without the grounding that makes existence bearable, and the bearable becomes questionable, becomes doubtful, becomes the thing that many cannot achieve, and the achieving is the challenge, is the task, is what modernity demands without providing resources, without offering solutions, without giving answers, because there are no answers, there is no solution, there is only the void, only the emptiness, only the silence, and the silence is what speaks, is what reveals, is what remains at the horizon of meaning where meaning has ended, and nothing has replaced it, and nothing ever will. The suffering is not in having little, but in having less. Not in lacking, but in being surpassed. Not in absence, but in comparison. And comparison is constant, is unavoidable, is built into perception, into cognition, into the social architecture of human life. Because humans are not isolated processes of absolute value, but are deeply embedded in networks where worth is relative, where position matters more than possession, where status is the thing being tracked, being measured, being fought over, and the fighting is exhausting, is endless, is producing anxiety that has no clear source except the presence of others, the visibility of their achievements, their possessions, their apparent happiness, and the apparent is what matters, is what comparison operates on, because comparison does not have access to internal states, cannot measure actual satisfaction or genuine contentment, can only measure signals, displays, the external markers that are supposed to indicate success. And success is not absolute, is not a threshold that once crossed brings lasting peace, but is relative, is defined against the success of others, is meaningful only in context, only in relationship, only as position in a hierarchy that has no natural endpoints, no place where more is impossible, no level where comparison stops, and the stopping is what never happens, is what cannot happen, because there is always someone higher, always someone with more, always someone whose position makes one's own position feel insufficient, feel like failure, feel like falling behind, and behind is where comparison places everyone, except the very top, except the singular position that by definition only one can occupy, and even that position is temporary, is unstable, is vulnerable to being surpassed, to losing the lead, to falling back into the mass of strivers who are all measuring themselves against the same unreachable standard. And the unreachable is what drives the system, is what keeps everyone running, keeps everyone comparing, keeps everyone suffering from the gap between where they are and where they see others, where they imagine others, where the displays and signals suggest others have arrived, and the arrival is illusion, is performance, is the curated presentation that social media perfects, that makes comparison more toxic than ever before. Because the comparison is now constant, is now unavoidable, is now the default activity of any moment with a screen. And the screen shows the highlight reel, shows the best moments, the peak experiences, the carefully selected and filtered images that are meant to represent lives, but are really representing brands, representing the performance of success. And the performance is what gets compared against reality, against the unfiltered experience of one's own life, with all its ordinariness, all its mundane moments, all the time that is not photogenic, not shareable, not worth displaying. And the asymmetry creates distortion, creates the sense that everyone else is doing better, is happier, is more successful, is living the life that one should be living, but is not. And the not is experienced as personal failure, as inadequacy, as evidence that something is wrong with the self, when really what is wrong is the comparison, is the measuring of internal experience against external display, of reality against performance, of the whole of one's life against the curated fragments of others' lives. And the fragments are not representative, are not honest, are not revealing the struggles, the doubts, the failures that are also present but are edited out, are kept private, are not part of the display, and so the display creates impossible standards, creates the sense that success should be constant, that happiness should be visible, that worth should be demonstrable. And demonstrable means comparable, means measurable against others, means existing in the public space where position can be assessed, where rank can be assigned, where the hierarchy becomes visible. And the visibility is what social media provides, is what makes the panopticon complete, is what ensures that everyone is always being watched, always being measured, always being compared, not by a central authority, but by everyone else, by the distributed surveillance of the network, where every post is a signal, every image is a claim, every update is a statement of position, and the position is what matters, is what gets evaluated, is what determines worth in the social economy, where attention is currency and visibility is power, and power is zero-sum, is rivalrous, is gained by some at the expense of others, because attention is finite, is limited, is allocated according to comparison, according to who is most interesting, most successful, most worth watching. And the worth watching is what everyone is competing for, is what drives the performance, is what makes authenticity impossible. Because authenticity does not optimize for attention, does not maximize engagement, does not win the comparison, and winning is what the system demands, is what the architecture incentivizes, is what the algorithms reward. And the rewards go to those who perform best, who display most effectively, who signal status most clearly, and the clarity is achieved through excess, through conspicuous consumption, through the demonstration of resources, of connections, of experiences that others do not have. And the not having is what makes the display valuable, is what makes it worth envying, is what triggers the comparison that produces the anxiety that drives more performance, more display, more competition. And the competition is the prison, is the trap, is the system that has no exit, because exiting means becoming invisible, means losing position, means falling behind. And behind is unbearable, is the failure state, is where the losers are. And no one wants to be a loser. No one wants to be the one who is surpassed, who is left behind, who is forgotten. And the forgetting is what happens to those who stop performing, who stop displaying, who drop out of the comparison. And dropping out is not freedom but is erasure, is not peace but is irrelevance, is not escape but is defeat. And so most stay in, most keep performing, most keep comparing, most keep suffering from the gap between where they are and where they see others. And the seeing is continuous, is unavoidable, is the default state of consciousness. In an environment where everyone's position is visible, where everyone's success is displayed, where everyone's life is performance, and the performance is what gets internalized, becomes the standard against which the self is measured. And the measuring is constant, is automatic, is happening at every moment, in every context, whenever others are present, or even when they are not present but are represented, are visible through screens, through feeds, through the endless stream of signals that constitute social media. And social media is the panopticon perfected, is the prison where everyone is guard and prisoner simultaneously, is watching and being watched, is judging and being judged, is comparing and being compared. And the comparing is the punishment, is the suffering, is the anxiety that has no clear cause except the presence of others, the visibility of their position, the evidence that they have what one does not have, and the not having is experienced as deprivation, as relative deprivation, as the sense that one is lacking not in absolute terms but in comparison to others, and the comparison is the only terms that matter, is the only measurement that counts. Because humans are social, are tribal, are wired to care about position, about rank, about where they stand in the hierarchy. And the hierarchy is not natural, is not fixed, is not based on any inherent quality, but is constructed through comparison, through the constant evaluation of signals, of displays, of the markers that are supposed to indicate worth. And worth is not intrinsic, is not internal, is not a property of the self, but is assigned, is determined by others, is the result of comparison, of measurement, of the social process that ranks everyone according to criteria that are arbitrary, that are culturally specific, that are manipulable. And the manipulation is what social media enables, is what allows anyone to perform success, to display status, to signal position regardless of underlying reality. And the reality is hidden, is private, is not part of the comparison. And so the comparison is always distorted, is always measuring performance against performance, display against display, rather than reality against reality. And the reality is that most people are struggling, are anxious, are feeling inadequate, are suffering from the same comparison that they are inflicting on others, and the inflicting is not intentional, is not malicious, is just participation, is just performing, is just displaying the signals that are required to maintain position, to avoid falling behind, to stay in the game. And the game is the prison, is the system that has no winners, because there is no end point, no level of success that brings peace, no amount of status that ends comparison, because comparison is relative, is always finding someone higher, always finding new metrics, always raising the bar, and the raising is what makes enough impossible, is what ensures that satisfaction is temporary, is what converts every achievement into baseline, into the new normal that is no longer impressive, no longer enviable, no longer worth displaying because everyone else has caught up, has matched the signal, has equaled the performance, and so new signals are needed, new displays are required, new forms of status must be pursued, and the pursuit is endless, is exhausting, is producing the anxiety that characterizes modern life, the sense that one is always falling behind, always insufficient, always failing to measure up. And the measuring up is the problem, is the trap, is the prison, because up is infinite, is unlimited, is always higher than wherever one currently is. And so the climbing never ends, never reaches a summit, never arrives at a place where comparison stops, where enough is recognized as enough, where peace is possible, and peace is not possible as long as comparison continues. As long as others are visible, as long as position matters, and position always matters, is wired into human psychology, is part of the social brain that evolved to track status, to monitor hierarchy, to care intensely about where one stands relative to others, and the relative is the only measure that counts, is the only information that the social brain processes, is why absolute improvements in living standards do not produce corresponding improvements in happiness. Because happiness is relative, is determined by comparison, is about position, not possession, and position is zero-sum, is gained by some at the expense of others, is the ranking that ensures most people feel inadequate most of the time. Because most people are not at the top, are not in the elite positions, are somewhere in the middle or the bottom, are below someone, are being surpassed by someone, are losing the comparison to someone, and the someone is always visible, is always present, is always there to trigger the anxiety, to produce the envy, to create the suffering that comes from measuring oneself against others and finding oneself lacking. And the lacking is not real, is not objective, is only relative, is only meaningful in comparison. But the comparison is what makes it feel real, what makes it feel like failure, what makes it feel like something is wrong, something needs to change, something must be improved. And the improvement is pursued, is worked toward, is achieved. And the achievement brings temporary satisfaction, brings a brief moment of feeling successful, of feeling adequate, of feeling like enough. But the enough is temporary, is quickly replaced by new comparison, by new awareness of those who are higher, who have more, who have surpassed. And the surpassing is the trigger, is what resets the baseline, is what converts achievement into inadequacy, is what makes the prison inescapable. Because escaping requires not just achieving more, but achieving more than everyone else. And everyone else is also striving, is also comparing, is also trying to escape through achievement. And so the competition intensifies, the standards rise, the bar keeps moving, and the moving is what makes peace impossible, makes satisfaction temporary, makes enough unattainable, because enough is not an absolute measure, but is relative, is defined by comparison, is determined by position, and position is always vulnerable, is always threatened, is always at risk of being lost. And the risk creates anxiety, creates vigilance, creates the constant monitoring of others, of their signals, of their displays, of any evidence that they're gaining, advancing, surpassing, and the surpassing is what must be prevented, is what drives the performance, is what makes rest impossible, makes dropping out unthinkable, makes the prison unescapable, except by those rare individuals who somehow break free of comparison, who somehow stop measuring themselves against others, who somehow find peace in their own position, regardless of where that position is in the hierarchy. And these individuals are rare, are exceptions, are not the norm, because the norm is comparison, is the constant measurement, is the anxiety that comes from always being aware of others, of their position, of their apparent success. And the apparent is what matters, is what the social brain responds to, is what triggers the envy. And envy is information, is the signal that someone else has something valuable, something worth having, something that could improve one's own position. And the position is what envy is tracking, is what it is designed to make salient, is the gap that needs closing. And the closing is pursued through imitation, through acquisition, through the striving to match what the envied other has, to equal their position, to eliminate the gap. But the gap never closes, is never eliminated, because as soon as one gap is closed, another opens. As soon as one person is matched, another surpasses. As soon as one goal is achieved, the goalposts move, and the moving is what makes the prison permanent, makes the suffering chronic, makes the anxiety inescapable, because the architecture of social comparison is not designed for peace, is not optimized for satisfaction, is designed for striving, for competition, for the endless pursuit of position. And the pursuit is the function, is what the system needs, is what makes the hierarchy dynamic, what keeps people climbing, what ensures that those at the top are always being challenged, always being pursued, always at risk of being overtaken. And the risk is what makes their position valuable, is what makes status worth having, is what creates the scarcity that makes position meaningful. And meaningful means enviable, means desirable, means worth suffering for. And the suffering is universal, is experienced at every level, is not limited to those at the bottom, but is felt even at the top. Because even at the top there is comparison. There is the awareness of others who are close, who are threatening, who might surpass, and the might creates anxiety, creates the need to defend position, to maintain distance, to keep performing, keep displaying, keep signalling status. And the signalling is exhausting, is requiring constant effort, constant vigilance, constant awareness of how one is being perceived, how one is being measured, how one's position is being evaluated by others who are always comparing, always measuring, always judging. And the judging is mutual, is reciprocal, is everyone evaluating everyone else, is the distributed surveillance that makes the panopticon total, that makes escape impossible, that ensures everyone is always in the prison, always being compared, always suffering from the awareness that others are watching, measuring, judging, and that the judgment might be negative, might find one lacking, might assign a lower position than one wants, than one deserves, than one has worked for. And the work is never enough, is never sufficient, is never achieving the permanent security that would allow rest, would allow peace, would allow the comparison to stop mattering. Because the comparison never stops mattering, is always relevant, is always the measure that counts, is what determines worth in the social economy, where position is everything, where rank is identity, where hierarchy is reality, and reality is constructed through comparison, through the constant measurement that assigns everyone a place, a position, a rank. And the rank is always provisional, always temporary, always vulnerable to change, to being surpassed, to falling. And the falling is what everyone fears, is what drives the anxiety, is what makes the prison work. Because the prison is not a place, but is a process, is the constant comparison that measures everyone against everyone else and finds everyone lacking, because lacking is relative, is inevitable, is the necessary result of a system where only one can be first, where most must be middle, where someone must be last and the last is where no one wants to be, is the position that is avoided, that is fled from, that creates the most anxiety, the most suffering, the most desperate striving to escape. And the escape is pursued through the same means that created the prison, through comparison, through performance, through display, through the signalling of status that is supposed to improve position, but only reinforces the system, only strengthens the prison, only ensures that comparison continues, that measurement persists, that the anxiety remains. And the remaining is permanent, is chronic, is the condition of social existence in an environment where everyone is visible, where position is trackable, where comparison is unavoidable. And the unavoidable is what makes the suffering universal, is what ensures that peace is rare, that satisfaction is temporary, that enough is never enough, because enough is not absolute but is relative, is determined by comparison, is defined by position, and position is always being measured, always being evaluated, always being compared, and the comparison is the prison, is the trap, is the source of suffering that has no solution except the impossible one of stopping comparison, of ceasing to measure oneself against others, of finding worth that is internal rather than relative, that is intrinsic rather than assigned, that is independent of position, independent of rank, independent of the hierarchy that comparison creates and maintains, and the maintenance is collective. Is everyone participating? Everyone contributing? Everyone reinforcing the system by comparing, by displaying, by performing, by caring about position? And the caring is what makes the prison work, is what keeps everyone trapped, is what ensures that suffering continues, that anxiety persists, that peace remains impossible as long as comparison continues, as long as others are visible, as long as position matters, and position will always matter, will always be salient, will always be the measure that counts. Because humans are social, are hierarchical, are wired to care about rank, about status, about where they stand relative to others, and the relative is the only measurement that has ever mattered, is the only comparison that counts, is the prison that has no walls but is inescapable, is the trap that has no lock but cannot be opened, is the suffering that has no cause except comparison, except the presence of others, except the visibility of their position. And the position is always visible, is always present, is always there to measure against, to fall short of, to suffer from the awareness that someone is higher, someone has more, someone is better, and the better is what one is not, is what one is lacking, is what the comparison reveals, and the revealing is the suffering, is the prison, is the condition that cannot be escaped as long as comparison continues, and comparison will continue, must continue, is built into the architecture of social existence, is the foundation of the hierarchy, is the mechanism that assigns position. And position is everything, is worth, is identity, is the measure of the self, and the self is always being measured, always being compared, always being found insufficient. And the insufficient is the prison, is the trap, is the suffering that is universal, that is inescapable, that is the cost of being social, of being visible, of being in comparison with others. And the comparison is the prison, and the prison is where everyone lives, where everyone suffers, where peace is impossible and enough is never enough. Knowledge of death's timing changes everything, converts the abstract certainty into concrete countdown, transforms mortality from philosophical concept into calendar date, into the number of days remaining, into the tangible approaching of an endpoint that was always coming but was kept safely distant by uncertainty, by the not knowing that allowed life to proceed as if time were infinite, as if tomorrow were guaranteed, as if the future extended indefinitely, even though reason knows it does not, knows it cannot, knows that death is certain and that the certainty will arrive, but the arriving felt distant, felt abstract, felt like something that happens eventually, but not yet, not soon, not on a specific date that can be marked on calendars, that can be counted down to, that can be known in advance with accuracy that is not perfect but is close enough, is 96%, is the probability that the algorithm assigns after analysing the data, after processing the medical records, the genetic information, the lifestyle factors, the environmental exposures, the family history, the biomarkers, the patterns that correlate with longevity, with disease, with the failures that lead to death, and the failures are predictable, are following patterns that machine learning can detect, can model, can use to generate predictions that are accurate enough to be actionable, to be used by insurance companies, by employers, by governments, by anyone who has access to the data and the algorithms. And the access is spreading, is becoming easier, is approaching the point where anyone can know their death date, can receive the prediction, can see the number, can confront the countdown. And the confrontation is what changes everything, is what transforms life from open-ended to finite, from abstract mortality to concrete deadline, from the someday of death to the specific day, the specific year, the specific age at which the algorithm predicts the ending will come. And the coming is what becomes real, becomes present, becomes the fact that shapes every decision, every plan, every moment, because the moments are numbered, are limited, are approaching zero, and the zero is known, is visible, is the date that appears on the screen after the algorithm processes the data, after the calculation completes, after the probability is assigned, and the probability is high, is 96%, is accurate enough that insurance companies are using it, are adjusting premiums based on predicted death dates, are denying coverage to those whose dates are too near, are charging more to those whose dates reveal risk, reveal vulnerability, reveal the likelihood of claims, and the claims are what matter to insurers, are what drive the calculations, are what make death dates valuable information, are what justify the investment in algorithms, in data processing, in the machine learning systems that can predict mortality with accuracy that exceeds human intuition, that surpasses clinical judgment. That is better than what doctors can do, what actuaries can estimate, what anyone could know before the algorithms existed, and the existence is recent, is new, is the result of advances in computing, in data collection, in the availability of medical records, genetic sequences, lifestyle data, all the information that used to be scattered, that used to be private, that used to be inaccessible, but is now consolidated, is now analysed, is now feeding the algorithms that predict death dates. And the predictions are accurate, are reliable, are being used, are shaping decisions, are affecting lives, are creating the knowledge that was not available before, that humans did not have before, that changes what it means to be mortal, because mortality was always certain but was never scheduled, was never assigned a date, was never made concrete in the way that the algorithm makes it concrete, makes it specific, makes it countable. And the counting is what humans are doing, are responding to, are organising their lives around. Once they know, once they receive the prediction, once they see the date, and the seeing changes everything, makes priorities shift, makes some things urgent and other things irrelevant, makes the future feel different, feel shorter, feel like it is running out, and the running out is literal, is measurable, is the countdown that starts the moment the date is known, the moment the algorithm delivers its prediction, and the prediction is usually not exact, is usually a range, is usually giving a year rather than a day, but the year is specific enough, is concrete enough, is making death real in a way it was not real before, and the reality is what some cannot bear, is what drives some to ignore the prediction, to refuse the knowledge, to not ask for the date, to not run the algorithm, to maintain the uncertainty that allows life to feel open-ended, that allows the illusion of infinite time. And the illusion is functional, is protective, is what most humans need in order to function, in order to plan, in order to invest in futures that might not arrive. And the arrival is what the algorithm predicts, is what it calculates, is what it makes known. And the known is both liberation and burden, is both the gift of clarity and the curse of certainty, because certainty about death is not like certainty about other things, is not providing comfort, is not making life easier, is making life harder, is making every moment weighted, is making every choice consequential, is creating the pressure of the countdown, of the limited time, of the approaching zero. And the zero is death, is the end point, is the date that the algorithm predicts. And the prediction is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping how people live. Once they know, once they receive the information, once they confront the countdown, and the confrontation is what matters, is what the algorithm creates, is the transformation of abstract mortality into concrete deadline. And the deadline is what changes behaviour, is what makes some people quit their jobs, leave their marriages, pursue dreams they had deferred, make radical changes in the hope that the changes will alter the prediction, will push the date further away, will buy more time. And the time is what everyone wants, is what the algorithm quantifies, is what becomes precious once it is known to be limited. Once the limit is visible, once the countdown begins, and the beginning is the moment of knowing, is the moment the prediction is delivered, is the moment the algorithm completes its calculation and displays the date. And the date is sometimes soon, is sometimes far, is sometimes already past, and the past is the strangest case. Is the situation where the algorithm predicts a death date that has already occurred, that has already passed, and the passing means the prediction was wrong, means the person has outlived their calculated mortality, has survived beyond what the algorithm expected, and the expectation was based on data, was based on patterns, was based on probabilities that apply to populations, but not necessarily to individuals. And the individual is what matters, is what the algorithm is trying to predict. But individuals vary, individuals are unique, individuals do not always follow the patterns, and the patterns are statistical, are probabilistic, are accurate for groups, but not always for persons. And persons are what the algorithm is being applied to, is being used on, is generating predictions for, and the predictions are mostly accurate, are right 96% of the time, but the 4% is significant, is the margin where the algorithm fails, where the prediction is wrong, where people die earlier than predicted or survive longer than predicted, and the longer is what some experience, is what creates the strange situation of living past one's predicted death date, of waking up on the day after the day that was supposed to be the last day, and the last day was not the last, was not the ending, was just another day, and the day after is another day, and the days continue, and the continuation is confusing, is disorienting, is raising questions about what the prediction meant, about whether it was wrong, about whether the algorithm failed, or whether something changed, whether the person's condition improved, whether the factors that were feeding the prediction shifted, and the shifting is possible, is part of what makes the predictions not fixed, not absolute, not carved in stone, but calculated from data that is current at the moment of calculation, but that changes, that evolves, that reflects conditions that can improve or deteriorate. And the improvement is what some people achieve, is what some people work toward, is the reason some people change their lifestyles. After receiving the prediction, after seeing the date, after confronting the countdown. And the countdown motivates, creates urgency, creates the pressure to change, to improve, to extend the time, to push the date further away. And the pushing is sometimes successful, is sometimes resulting in new predictions, in updated calculations, in revised death dates that are later than the original dates. And the later is what everyone wants, is what the changes are aiming for, is what makes people exercise, eat differently, reduce stress, stop smoking, address conditions that were being ignored, take medications that were being skipped, make appointments that were being postponed, all in the hope that the algorithm will notice, will incorporate the changes, will recalculate, will generate a new prediction with a later date. And the later is what some people achieve, is what some people see when they run the algorithm again, when they check the prediction, when they look for evidence that their efforts have mattered, have changed the trajectory, have bought time. And the time is what matters, is what the algorithm quantifies, is what becomes visible through the prediction. And the prediction is not destiny, is not fate, is not fixed, is probability, is likelihood, is the best estimate based on data. But estimates can be wrong. Data can change, probabilities can shift, and the shifting is what makes the algorithm dynamic, makes the predictions update, makes the death dates change, sometimes moving closer, sometimes moving further, sometimes disappearing entirely when new data arrives, when conditions improve, when the patterns that were predicting early death are disrupted by interventions, by treatments, by changes that alter the trajectory. And the trajectory is what the algorithm models, is what it calculates, is what it uses to predict the future. And the future is uncertain, is probabilistic, is not determined, but is shaped by choices, by circumstances, by the countless factors that influence health, that affect longevity, that determine when death arrives, and the arriving is what the algorithm predicts, is what it calculates with 96% accuracy. But the accuracy is for populations, is statistical, is not guaranteed for individuals, and individuals are what matter, are who receive the predictions, are who live with the knowledge, are who face the countdown, and the countdown is real, is concrete, is making mortality tangible in a way it never was before, and the before was uncertainty, was the not knowing that allowed life to feel open-ended, that allowed plans to extend indefinitely, that allowed the future to seem guaranteed even though it was not, even though death was always certain, always approaching, always inevitable. And the inevitable is what the algorithm makes visible, makes specific, makes countable. And the counting is what changes everything, is what transforms life. Once the date is known, once the prediction is received, once the algorithm delivers its calculation, and the calculation is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping insurance, shaping employment, shaping medical care, shaping decisions about treatment, about intervention, about whether to invest in extending life, when the extension is predicted to be brief, when the algorithm says the time is short, when the date is near, and the near is what matters, is what determines coverage, determines access, determines whether resources are allocated, whether treatments are approved, whether hope is offered or withheld, and the withholding is what some fear, is what the algorithm enables, is the denial of care based on predicted death dates, based on the calculation that says the investment is not worth it, that the time remaining is too brief, that the return is insufficient, and the return is measured in life years, in quality-adjusted survival, in the metrics that reduce existence to numbers, to calculations, to the outputs of algorithms that predict mortality and that are used to decide who receives treatment and who does not, who gets coverage and who is denied, who is worth investing in and who is not. And the not worth is the judgment that the algorithm makes possible, is the decision that becomes justifiable when death dates are known, when predictions are reliable, when accuracy is 96% and the percent is high enough to be trusted, to be acted upon, to be used as basis for decisions that affect lives, that determine futures, that shape who survives and who does not. And the survival is what matters, is what everyone wants, is what the algorithm is supposedly helping by predicting, by warning, by providing information that can be used to intervene, to prevent, to extend life. But the extension is not guaranteed, is not automatic, is requiring resources, requiring access, requiring the willingness to invest in futures that might be brief, that might not extend far beyond the predicted date. And the date is what hangs over everything, is what shapes decisions, is what makes some futures seem worth pursuing, and others not. And the not worth is the category that some people are placed into once their death dates are known, once their predictions reveal short timelines, limited futures, approaching endpoints. And the endpoints are what the algorithm calculates, are what it makes visible, are what transform mortality from abstract to concrete, from someday to specific day, from uncertain to known. And the known is what changes everything, is. What makes death real is what creates the countdown, the pressure, the urgency, the weight of limited time. And the time is running out, is approaching zero, is moving toward the date that the algorithm predicted, and the prediction is accurate, is reliable, is right 96% of the time. And the time is what matters, is what is being counted, is what is being lost, is what is approaching exhaustion, and the exhaustion is death, is the end point, is the zero that the countdown reaches and the reaching is inevitable, is certain, is what the algorithm predicts, is what the calculation shows, is what the death date represents. And the representation is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping reality, is making mortality concrete, is transforming death from philosophical abstraction into calendar appointment, into the date that is marked, that is known, that is approaching, and the approaching is what matters, is what changes everything, is what makes the algorithm powerful, is what makes the prediction consequential, is what transforms knowledge of death date from curiosity into burden, from information into weight, from prediction into reality. And the reality is that death is approaching, is scheduled, is calculated, is known. And the knowing changes everything, makes every moment count, makes every decision matter, makes life feel urgent, finite, precious, limited. And the limited is what the algorithm reveals, is what the death date represents, is what 96% accuracy means, which is that the countdown is real, is reliable, is approaching the end, and the end is death. Is the date, is what the algorithm predicts, is what the calculation shows, is what some people know, is what some people live with, is what some people count down to. And the counting is real, is happening, is making mortality concrete, is transforming death from abstraction to appointment, from someday to specific day, from uncertain to known. And the known is the algorithm, is the prediction, is the death date that is calculated, that is displayed, that is accurate 96% of the time. And the time is running out, is approaching zero, is moving toward the date, and the date is death, is the end point, is what the algorithm predicts, is what some people know, is what changes everything, is the countdown, is the calculation, is the algorithm that predicts death date with 96% accuracy. And the accuracy is what matters, is what makes the prediction real, is what makes mortality concrete, is what makes death a date, a number, a countdown, and the countdown is happening, is real, is approaching zero, is moving toward death. And death is the algorithm, is the prediction, is the date that is known, that is calculated, that is approaching. And the approaching is certain, is reliable, is accurate 96% of the time. And the time is what remains, is what is counted, is what is running out. And the running out is death, is the date, is what the algorithm predicts. And the prediction is accurate, is real, is the countdown to death, to the end point, to the zero. And the zero is approaching, is certain, is the date that is known, that is calculated, that is predicted by the algorithm with 96% accuracy. And the accuracy is what makes it real, what makes it matter, what makes death a date. And the date is approaching, is certain, is the countdown, is the algorithm, is the prediction, is death. Certainty became the sin, became the transgression that was punished, became the sign of pride, of arrogance, of the refusal to acknowledge limitation. And this society built its entire structure around the opposite value, around the celebration of error, around the sanctification of being wrong, around the belief that mistakes were not failures, but were revelations, were demonstrations of humility, were proof that the person was acknowledging their limitations, was accepting their fallibility, was recognizing that knowledge is always provisional, always uncertain, always potentially mistaken, and the mistaken became sacred, became the thing to aspire to, became the marker of virtue. And virtue in this society was not being right but was being willing to be wrong, was not knowing but was doubting, was not certainty but was the constant acknowledgement that certainty is impossible, that knowledge is limited, that every belief could be false, and the false became celebrated, became honoured, became the thing that festivals commemorated, that rituals enacted, that the entire culture was organised around, and the organising was systematic, was creating institutions that rewarded error, that punished correctness, that inverted all the normal incentives, all the usual values, all the expected responses to being right or wrong, and wrong became right, became the goal, became what people strived for, and striving for error became the highest calling, became the most virtuous path, became the way to demonstrate epistemic humility, to show that one was not claiming to possess truth, was not asserting certainty, was not committing the sin of believing oneself to be correct, and correct became immoral, became the sign of pride, became evidence of having failed to recognize one's own fallibility. And fallibility was the central doctrine, was the core belief, was the foundation on which the entire society was built. The recognition that humans are limited, are prone to error, are incapable of achieving certainty, and that any claim to certainty is therefore false, is therefore sinful, is therefore requiring punishment, requiring correction through the celebration of incorrectness, through the ritual acknowledgement of error, through the systematic inversion of the values that make being right desirable and being wrong shameful, and the shameful became sacred, became the thing to be proud of, became the demonstration of virtue. And virtue was being wrong, was making mistakes, was celebrating failures, and failures were what the society honoured, were what the festivals commemorated, were what the rituals enacted, and the enacting was elaborate, was involving public confessions of correctness, public acknowledgements of having believed something that turned out to be true, public expressions of shame for having been right, and being right was the transgression, was the sin, was what required confession, required penance, required the ritual humiliation of admitting that one had failed to be sufficiently humble, had failed to doubt enough, had failed to recognize the possibility of error, and the possibility was what the society insisted upon, was what the doctrine required, was the constant acknowledgement that everything believed could be wrong, that every claim could be false, that certainty is impossible, and that any feeling of certainty is delusion, is pride, is the sin that must be punished through the celebration of error, through the festival of failures, through the systematic rewarding of being wrong and the systematic punishment of being right. And right became wrong, became the thing to avoid, became the sign of having failed morally, of having committed the sin of certainty. And certainty was the ultimate transgression, was the worst sin, was what the society could not tolerate, could not accept, could not allow to persist, and the persistence of certainty was met with exile, with exclusion, with the removal from the community of those who insisted they were right, who claimed to know, who refused to acknowledge the possibility of error, and error was what the community demanded, was what membership required, was the price of belonging, and belonging meant accepting that one was wrong, that one's beliefs were false, that one's knowledge was limited, and the limited was celebrated, was honoured, was the virtue that made the society cohere, that made the culture function, that created the bonds between members who were united in their shared fallibility, in their collective acknowledgement of limitation, in their mutual celebration of error. And error became the bond, became what connected people, became what made the society possible. And the possible was a form of life that was radically different from others. That was inverting the normal values, that was making sacred what others made profane, that was celebrating what others lamented, that was honouring what others punished. And the punishment in this society was for being right, was for claiming correctness, was for displaying certainty. And certainty was the crime, was the transgression, was what could not be tolerated. And the toleration was only for error, only for doubt, only for the constant acknowledgement of fallibility. And fallibility was the doctrine, was the belief, was the foundation, and the foundation was stable, was solid, was maintaining the society for generations, for centuries, for the entire duration of its existence. And the existence was marked by the festival of failures, by the annual celebration of the greatest mistakes, of the most spectacular errors, of the claims that had been most confidently held and most thoroughly disproven. And the disproof was the achievement, was the accomplishment, was what was honoured in the festival. And the festival was elaborate, was involving performances of the errors, reenactments of the mistakes, public displays of the wrongness that had been achieved. And the achieving was intentional, was the result of effort, was the work of those who were striving to be wrong, who were seeking error, who were trying to make claims that would be false, and the false was difficult to achieve reliably, was requiring effort, was not happening automatically, Because even in a society that celebrates error, even in a culture that sanctifies mistake, the tendency toward accuracy persists, the inclination toward truth remains. The unconscious processes that are trying to model reality correctly continue to operate, and the operating sometimes produces correctness, sometimes generates accuracy, sometimes results in beliefs that correspond to reality, and the correspondence was the problem, was the sin, was the transgression that required confession, required penance, required the public acknowledgement that one had been right, and being right was shameful, was evidence of failure, was proof that the person had not been sufficiently committed to error, had not tried hard enough to be wrong, had allowed accuracy to emerge, and the emergence was accidental, was unintended, was the result of the processes that make humans generally reliable at forming true beliefs, despite the society's best efforts to prevent this, despite the systematic rewarding of error and punishing of correctness, despite the entire structure being organized to celebrate mistake, the truth kept emerging, kept appearing, kept being accidentally discovered. And the discovery was the crisis, was the problem, was what the society did not know how to handle. Because the doctrine said that truth was unknowable, that certainty was impossible, that every belief was potentially false. But what happens when a belief is clearly true, when the accuracy is undeniable, when the correspondence between claim and reality is obvious to everyone, and the obvious is what created the crisis, is what produced the schism, is what happened when someone in the society got something right by accident, made a claim that was intended to be false, that was designed to demonstrate fallibility, that was meant to be an error, but turned out to be correct, turned out to be true, turned out to correspond to reality in ways that could not be denied. And the denial was attempted, was the first response, was the effort to maintain the doctrine by insisting that the claim was still wrong, was still false, was still demonstrating error, even though the evidence showed otherwise. And the evidence was overwhelming, was undeniable, was forcing the society to confront the fact that sometimes people are right, that sometimes beliefs are true, that sometimes knowledge is achieved, and the achievement was the problem, was the crisis, was what the doctrine could not accommodate. Because if someone could be right, could be correct, could know something with certainty, then the entire foundation was threatened. The entire structure was unstable. The entire culture was built on a premise that was being challenged, and the challenge came not from outside, not from critics, not from enemies, but from within, from the accidental discovery of truth, from the unintended achievement of correctness, from the mistake of being right in a society that celebrated being wrong. And being wrong was no longer possible for this claim, was no longer achievable for this belief, was no longer something that could be maintained in the face of the evidence. And the evidence was what created the split, was what divided the society, was what produced the factions, one insisting that the doctrine must be maintained, that error must still be celebrated even in the face of apparent truth, that the claim must somehow be wrong even though it appears to be right, and the other faction arguing that the doctrine itself was an error, was itself a mistake, was itself something that should be celebrated for being wrong, and the wrong was what the doctrine was about error, was about the impossibility of certainty, was about the necessity of doubt. And if the doctrine itself was wrong, then being wrong about being wrong was being right about being right, was vindicating the value of correctness, was showing that truth was possible, that certainty could be achieved, that knowledge was not always provisional, and that always was what was challenged, was what the crisis threatened, was what the accidental correctness undermined, and the undermining led to collapse, led to fragmentation, led to the dissolution of the society that had been held together by the shared celebration of error, by the collective acknowledgement of fallibility, by the mutual honouring of mistake, and the mistake that destroyed them was being right, was achieving accuracy, was discovering truth, And the truth was that error was not always achievable, that correctness sometimes emerged despite efforts to prevent it, that reality imposed itself despite the doctrine, despite the culture, despite the systematic attempts to celebrate wrongness. And wrongness was no longer universal, was no longer guaranteed, was no longer the shared condition that made the society cohere, and the coherence dissolved, was lost, was replaced by conflict between those who insisted on maintaining the doctrine and those who argued that the doctrine had been proven wrong by the very success of someone being right. And the success was accidental, was unintended, was the crisis that destroyed the cult that worshipped being wrong, that celebrated mistake, that made error sacred. And sacred was what being wrong had been, was what the society had made it, was what the culture had enforced, but the enforcement failed, was overcome, was shown to be impossible when truth emerged, despite the efforts to suppress it, when correctness appeared despite the attempts to prevent it, when someone got something right by accident, and the accident revealed that being wrong was not always possible, that error was not always achievable, that the doctrine itself was mistaken, was fallible, was demonstrating the very thing it claimed was universal, which was that all beliefs can be wrong, including the belief that all beliefs can be wrong, and the wrong about wrong was right about right, was showing that correctness was possible, that truth could be known, that certainty could be achieved, at least about some things, at least sometimes, at least in the case that destroyed the cult, that dissolved the society, that ended the celebration of error by demonstrating that error was not the only option, that being right was possible, that truth existed, and the existence of truth was what the cult could not tolerate, could not accommodate, could not integrate into the doctrine, and the doctrine was abandoned, was rejected, was shown to be wrong, and being wrong about the celebration of being wrong was the final irony, was the ultimate demonstration of fallibility, was the proof that even the systematic celebration of error could itself be an error, could itself be mistaken, could itself be wrong, and wrong was what the cult was about being, was what they celebrated, was what they made sacred. So being wrong about the value of being wrong should have been celebrated, should have been honoured, should have been the greatest achievement, but instead it was the crisis, was the problem, was the thing that could not be integrated, could not be accepted, could not be celebrated because it undermined everything, because it showed that the doctrine was not just wrong, but was impossibly wrong, was self-refuting, was demonstrating through its own wrongness that wrongness was not the highest value, was not the ultimate virtue, was not the thing to be celebrated, and the celebration ended, was terminated, was replaced by confusion, by conflict, by the dissolution of the society that had been held together by the shared commitment to error. And the error that destroyed them was the error of believing that error was always achievable, was always possible, was always superior to correctness, and the superiority was the claim, was the doctrine, was the foundation that collapsed when someone was accidentally right and the accident revealed that rightness was possible, that truth existed, that certainty could be achieved, and the achievement destroyed the cult that worshipped being wrong, that celebrated mistake, that made error sacred, and sacred was what it had been, was what the society had made it, but the making was unmade, was dissolved, was ended by the accidental truth, by the unintended correctness, by the crisis of being right in a society that celebrated being wrong. And being wrong was no longer the only option, was no longer the shared condition, was no longer the bond that held the society together. And together they had been, united in error, committed to mistake, celebrating failure. But the celebration ended when failure failed, when error erred, when wrongness was wrong, and wrong about wrongness was right about rightness, was showing that the doctrine was mistaken, that the cult was in error, that the worship of being wrong was itself wrong, and wrong about wrong is right, is correctness, is truth, and truth destroyed the cult. dissolved the society, ended the celebration, and the ending was the result of accident, of unintended correctness, of someone being right when they meant to be wrong, and being right destroyed everything, revealed the doctrine to be false, showed the cult to be mistaken, demonstrated that error was not always possible, that correctness sometimes emerged, that truth existed despite the celebration of mistake, and the mistake was worshipping mistake, was celebrating error, was making wrongness sacred, and sacred it was until it was shown to be wrong, until the doctrine was proven false, until the cult collapsed because someone was accidentally right, and being right was the sin, was the transgression, was the mistake that could not be forgiven, could not be celebrated, could not be integrated, and the integration failed, the society dissolved, the cult ended, and what remained was the memory of the society that celebrated being wrong, that worshipped mistake, that made error sacred, and sacred it was until truth emerged, until correctness appeared, until someone was accidentally right, and the accident destroyed everything, ended the cult, dissolved the society, terminated the celebration of being wrong. And wrong was what they were about being, was what they celebrated, was what destroyed them, when they were wrong about it, when the doctrine itself was error, when the worship was mistake, and mistake was what ended it, was what dissolved it, was what revealed that being wrong about being wrong is being right about being right, and right destroyed them, ended them, dissolved the cult that worshipped being wrong. History is told as a story of improvement, of movement from darkness toward light, from ignorance toward knowledge, from savagery toward civilization. And this story is so deeply embedded in modern consciousness that questioning it feels like madness, feels like denying the obvious, like rejecting the evidence that surrounds us in the form of technology, medicine, institutions, all the apparatus that makes contemporary life safer, longer, more comfortable than life in previous centuries. But the story is a story, is a narrative constructed retrospectively, is an interpretation imposed on events that could be read differently, could be organized into different patterns, could reveal trajectories other than progress. And the other trajectories are visible once the mythology is recognized as mythology. Once the belief in linear improvement is seen as belief rather than fact, as framework rather than discovery, as one way of organizing time among many possible ways, and the ways that are not chosen are the ones where time is cyclical, where history repeats, where civilizations rise and fall in patterns that suggest not progress, but oscillation, not improvement, but alternation between order and chaos, between flourishing and collapse. And collapse is what the mythology of progress cannot acknowledge, cannot incorporate, cannot make sense of, except as temporary setback, as aberration, as the exception that proves the rule. But what if collapse is not the exception but the rule, is not the deviation but the pattern, is what happens to every complex system eventually, inevitably, necessarily, because complexity is fragile, is requiring constant energy to maintain. And when the energy fails, when the resources are exhausted, when the conditions that allowed the complexity to emerge are no longer present, the system simplifies, degrades, collapses back into disorder. And this is not failure, but thermodynamics, is not moral failing, but physical law, is entropy doing what entropy does. And entropy is not progress, is not moving toward anything, is not improving but is equalizing, is smoothing out gradients, is converting order into disorder, structure into randomness. And life civilization, all the complexity that humans value, is temporary resistance to this process, is local pockets of order maintained at the cost of increasing disorder elsewhere. And the elsewhere is growing, is expanding, is eventually consuming the local, because the second law is inexorable, is not suspended by hope or effort or belief in progress. And so, the mythology of progress is fighting against physics, is claiming that the arrow of time points toward improvement, when really it points toward heat death, toward the end of difference, the end of structure, the end of everything that makes progress possible. And the possible is temporary, is the brief window during which complexity can exist, can build, can imagine itself to be moving forward, when really it is just moving, is just changing, is just reconfiguring before the inevitable simplification. And the simplification is what history shows when the mythology is removed, when the narrative of progress is recognized as narrative, as story, as interpretation, because what history actually shows is cycles, is empires rising and falling, is knowledge being gained and lost, is technologies being invented and forgotten, is civilizations reaching heights and then collapsing into darkness from which new civilizations emerge. And the emergence is not progress, is not improvement, is just the cycle continuing, is the pattern repeating, is order arising from chaos and returning to chaos in the rhythm that characterizes complex systems. And complex systems are not stable, are not sustainable, are not moving toward equilibrium, but are far from equilibrium, are maintained by constant input of energy. And when the input falters, the system collapses. And the collapse is not pathological, is not avoidable, is built into the structure, is the natural end of complexity. And the end comes for every civilization, has come for every civilization, will come for this civilization, because the conditions that allow it to exist are temporary, are contingent, are dependent on resources that are finite, on stability that is fragile, on assumptions that are false. And the false assumptions include the mythology of progress, include the belief that things are getting better, that humanity is moving forward, that the future will be superior to the past, and the superiority is measured in terms that already assume progress, is using metrics like lifespan and GDP and technological capacity. And these metrics show increase, show growth, show what looks like improvement, but improvement toward what? Toward what end? Toward what purpose? And the purpose is assumed, is not questioned, is taken as obvious, as self-evident, that more is better, that longer is better, that faster is better. But these are values, are choices, are not facts, are not discoveries, are impositions of meaning onto patterns that have no inherent meaning. And the meaning could be otherwise, could value stability over growth, could value harmony over domination, could value cyclical return over linear advance. And the advance is the mythology, is the story that the Enlightenment told, is the narrative that science and reason and individual liberty would lead to continuous improvement, to the perfectibility of human nature, to the triumph over suffering, over ignorance, over all the limitations that had constrained previous generations. And the triumph has not arrived, has not materialized, because the limitations were not overcome, but were transformed, were replaced by new limitations, new forms of suffering, new kinds of ignorance. And the new is not better than the old, is just different, is just the current configuration of problems that arise from the current configuration of solutions. Because every solution creates new problems, every technology introduces new vulnerabilities, every increase in power produces new risks, and the risks accumulate, compound, create the conditions for collapse, for the failure of the systems that have become too complex, too interconnected, too dependent on conditions remaining stable. And stability is the exception, is the temporary state, is what complex systems move away from rather than toward, because complexity is dynamic, is changing, is adapting to pressures, and the adaptation is not progress but is response, is the system trying to maintain itself in the face of entropy, in the face of breakdown, in the face of the inevitable simplification. And the simplification is collapse, is the return to less complex states, is what happens when the energy required to maintain complexity exceeds the energy available, and the available is declining, is becoming scarce, is the resource base that allowed industrial civilization to emerge and that is now depleting, is now running out, is now revealing that the progress was not sustainable, was not based on infinite resources, but on finite stores that are being exhausted. And the exhaustion is the end of the mythology, is the revelation that progress was extraction, was the conversion of ancient sunlight into temporary complexity, into the structures that seem permanent, but are actually contingent, are actually dependent on inputs that are ending. And the ending is not failure, but is thermodynamics, is physics, is the way things work. And the way things work does not care about progress, does not care about human narratives, does not care about the stories that civilizations tell themselves to make sense of their existence. And the stories are necessary, are functional, are what allow coordination, are what create meaning, but they are not true, are not describing reality, are describing a constructed reality, a narrative reality, a reality that exists only in the collective imagination and that can be maintained only as long as the collective continues to believe. And the believing is becoming difficult, is becoming strained, because the evidence is mounting that progress has stalled, that the improvements have stopped, that the future is not going to be better than the present, might be worse, might be collapse, might be the simplification that has come for every other civilization and is now coming for this one. And the coming is not apocalypse, is not the end of everything, is just the end of this particular configuration, this particular arrangement of complexity. And what follows is not nothing but is different, is simpler, is less organized, less centralized, less dependent on the global systems that are currently failing, currently fragmenting, currently revealing their fragility. And the fragility was always there, was always the condition of complexity, was always the cost of building systems that are far from equilibrium, that require constant energy to maintain. And the energy is failing, is becoming unreliable, is exposing the mythology of progress as mythology, as story, as belief. That was never fact, was never discovery, was always interpretation, always narrative, always the imposition of meaning onto patterns that could mean anything, that could be organized into any story, and the story that is told shapes the response, shapes what is seen as problem and what is seen as solution, shapes whether collapse is recognized as collapse or is interpreted as temporary setback, as challenge to be overcome, as opportunity for innovation. And innovation is the god of. Progress is the answer to every problem, is the belief that human ingenuity can overcome any limitation, can solve any crisis, can extend the trajectory of improvement indefinitely. And the indefinitely is the lie, is the impossibility, is the claim that entropy can be defeated, that complexity can be maintained forever, that the conditions that allowed progress are permanent when they are temporary, are contingent, are ending. And the ending is visible in the stagnation of median incomes, in the declining returns on technology, in the increasing fragility of supply chains, in the breakdown of institutions, in the resurgence of tribalism, in all the signs that the center is not holding, that the complexity is too much, that the system is simplifying, whether it wants to or not. And the not wanting is the clinging to the mythology, is the insistence that progress must continue, that the future must be better, that collapse is not possible, not thinkable, not allowable, but the allowable is not up to humans, is not subject to preference, is determined by physics, by resources, by the limits that cannot be overcome through belief or effort or innovation. And the limits are asserting themselves, are becoming visible, are revealing that the mythology of progress was always just that, was always story, was always the narrative that a particular civilization told itself during its particular window of complexity. And the window is closing, is narrowing, is approaching the point where the story can no longer be maintained, where the evidence of stagnation and decline becomes overwhelming, becomes undeniable, becomes the new reality that requires a new story, a new mythology, and the new mythology is not yet formed, is not yet coherent, is emerging in fragments, in the recognition that growth cannot continue, that resources are finite, that complexity is fragile, that collapse is not aberration, but pattern, not failure, but phase, not the end, but the transition. And the transition is what humans are bad at, are resisting, are denying, because the mythology of progress makes transition look like regression, makes simplification look like failure, makes collapse look like catastrophe, when it is just change, is just the system moving to a different state, a less complex state, a state that requires less energy, less resources, less organization, and the less is not worse, is not better, is just different, is the configuration that is possible given the conditions, and the conditions are changing, are no longer supporting the complexity, are no longer providing the energy, are no longer maintaining the stability. And so the system is responding, is adapting, is simplifying, and the simplifying is collapse, is the end of the mythology, is the revelation that progress was never linear, was never guaranteed, was never more than a temporary pattern that emerged under specific conditions, and that is now ending as those conditions change. And the changing is not stoppable, is not reversible, is the natural progression of complex systems, is what happens when entropy reasserts itself, when the local order that was maintained at great cost can no longer be maintained, and what remains is disorder, is simplicity, is the lower energy state that does not require the constant input, the constant effort, the constant belief in progress, that was never more than belief, was never fact, was never discovery, was always mythology, and mythologies end, are always ending, are replaced by new mythologies that make sense of the new conditions, and the new conditions are simplification, are localization, are the breakdown of the global systems that defined progress, that made progress visible, that created the metrics by which improvement was measured, and the measuring is ending, is becoming irrelevant, because the systems that supported the measuring are fragmenting, are collapsing, are revealing that they were never as solid as they seemed, were always contingent, always temporary, always dependent on conditions that are now changing, and the changing is what humans must adapt to, must respond to, must accept, because the accepting is what allows response, what allows adaptation, what makes survival possible. And survival is not progress, is not improvement, is just continuation, is just the persistence of life in new forms, in simpler forms, in forms that do not require the mythology of progress, that do not assume the future will be better, that do not measure themselves against an imagined trajectory of improvement. And the imagined was always the problem, was always the mythology, was the story that made sense when complexity was increasing, when energy was abundant, when resources seemed infinite, but none of those conditions hold. Anymore, none of those assumptions are valid. And so the mythology is crumbling, is being revealed as mythology. And what is being revealed is not that progress was false, but that it was conditional, was temporary, was the pattern of a particular phase. And the phase is ending, is giving way to a different phase, a phase of simplification, of localization, of the breakdown, of complexity. And the breakdown is not the end, but is transition, is the movement from one state to another, from high complexity to lower complexity, from global systems to local systems, from the mythology of progress to something else, to some other story, some other way of making sense of time, of organizing history, of understanding change. And the understanding is what is needed, is what allows the transition to be navigated, allows collapse to be survived, allows the species to persist beyond the mythology, beyond the belief in progress, into a future that is not better or worse but different, is not moving forward or backward, but is just moving, is just changing, is just the continuation of patterns that have always characterized life, that have always characterized civilizations, that have always involved cycles of increase and decrease, of complexity and simplification, of rise and fall, and the fall is not tragedy, is not failure, is just the other half of the cycle, is the return that follows every advance, is the simplification that follows every increase in complexity, is the natural, inevitable, thermodynamically necessary end of every period of growth. And growth cannot be infinite, cannot continue forever, must end, must reverse, must give way to simplification. And the simplification is happening, is visible, is undeniable once the mythology is set aside, once the belief in progress is recognized as belief, as story, as narrative that served a purpose but is no longer serving that purpose, is no longer making sense of the present, is no longer predicting the future, is no longer functioning as mythology should function. And so it is being abandoned, is being replaced, is giving way to new stories, new frameworks, new ways of understanding time. And the new ways are not yet clear, are not yet coherent, are emerging in the recognition that progress was always mythology, that linear time was always story, that improvement was always interpretation, and that the patterns of history are not linear but cyclical, not progressive but oscillating, not moving toward anything but just moving, just changing, just expressing the dynamics of complex systems that arise and fall, that order and disorder that complexify and simplify in rhythms that have nothing to do with progress, nothing to do with improvement, nothing to do with the narratives that humans tell, but are just the way things work, the way systems behave, the way entropy plays out in the temporary pockets of order that are life, that are civilization, that are all the complexity that seems permanent but is actually fleeting, actually momentary, actually the brief resistance to the overwhelming tendency toward disorder. And the disorder is not evil, is not failure, is not the end of meaning, is just the default state, the equilibrium, the simplicity that complex systems return to. And the return is not tragedy, but is nature, is physics, is the way things are. And accepting this, accepting that progress was mythology, that collapse is natural, that the future is not moving forward, but is just moving, is what allows the transition, allows the adaptation, allows the species to survive beyond the mythology, beyond the belief that made sense for a while, but makes sense no longer. And the no longer is now, is the present, is the moment when the mythology is crumbling, is being revealed as story, and the story is ending. Not because it was false, but because it was conditional, was applicable only under certain conditions, and the conditions have changed, are changing, are no longer supporting the narrative, are no longer making progress visible, are no longer sustaining the belief, and so the belief is fading, is being replaced by something else, by the recognition that time is not linear, that history is not progressive, that the future is not determined by the past in any simple way, that complexity and simplicity alternate, that rise and fall are phases of the same cycle. And the cycle is what matters, is what persists, is what continues beyond any particular civilization, beyond any particular mythology, beyond any particular belief about where time is going or what the future holds. Because the future holds nothing except change, holds nothing except the continuation of patterns that have always operated, that operate now, that will continue to operate regardless of what humans believe, regardless of what stories they tell, regardless of the mythologies they construct to make sense of their existence. And the existence continues, adapts, persists, not through progress but through change, not through improvement but through transformation, not through moving forward but through moving, just changing, just being what systems are, which is dynamic, unstable, temporary, and always, eventually, inevitably, returning to simplicity, returning to disorder, returning to the state from which complexity briefly emerged and to which it always returns. And the return is not the end, but is the pattern, is the cycle, is the way things work. And working with this, accepting this, understanding this, is what allows humans to move beyond the mythology of progress, beyond the belief in linear time, beyond the narrative of improvement, into a relationship with time that is more honest, more realistic, more aligned with the actual patterns of history. And the actual patterns are not progressive, but are cyclical, are not moving forward but are oscillating, are not improving but are changing. And the changing is all there is all there ever was, is all there ever will be. And the will be is not better, is not worse, is just different, is just the future, is just what comes next. And what comes next is not determined by mythology, is not shaped by belief in progress, is not the continuation of improvement, but is the continuation of patterns, of cycles, of the rise and fall that has always characterized complexity, that has always characterized civilization, that is now revealing itself again, is now becoming visible again, is now showing that progress was always temporary, was always conditional, was always mythology, and mythology's end, must end, are ending now. And what comes after is not nothing but is different. Is the next story, the next framework, the next way of making sense of time, and the sense that is made will not include progress, will not assume improvement, will not project linear advance, but will recognize cycles, will accept collapse, will understand that complexity and simplicity alternate, that neither is permanent, that both are phases, and that the phase of progress, the phase of increasing complexity, the phase of the mythology is ending, is giving way to simplification, to collapse, to the next phase of the cycle. And the next phase is not tragedy, is not the end, is just different, is just what comes after growth, is just the return to lower complexity. And the return is natural, is inevitable, is happening now. And recognizing this, accepting this, understanding this is what allows the transition, what allows the adaptation, what makes survival possible beyond the mythology, beyond the belief in progress, beyond the narrative that time moves forward. Because time does not move forward, time just moves, just changes, just continues. And the continuing is not progress, but is just continuation, is just the persistence of patterns, of cycles, of the dynamics that have always operated and will always operate, regardless of what humans believe, regardless of the mythologies they construct, regardless of the stories they tell themselves, to make the chaos bearable. And the chaos is bearable, has always been bearable, is just change, is just the way things are. And the way things are does not include progress, does not include improvement, does not include the mythology, includes only change, only cycles, only the oscillation between complexity and simplicity, between order and disorder, between the rise that seems like progress and the fall that reveals. It was always just phase, just pattern, just the temporary resistance to entropy that all complex systems represent. And the representation is ending, is collapsing, is returning to simplicity, and the simplicity is not the end, but is the beginning, is the ground from which new complexity might emerge, might rise, might begin a new cycle. And the new cycle will not be progress, but will just be cycle, will just be pattern, will just be the continuation of dynamics that do not care about human narratives, do not respond to human beliefs, do not acknowledge the mythology of progress, except as one more temporary pattern that emerged and fell, that rose and collapsed, that was and is no longer, and the no longer is now.